Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and thank you for coming today. My name is William Henry. I'm the adjutant for the Indiana American Legion for the department. In Indiana today, he's there speaking to the student body for a annual Veterans Day event to about 3,000 students. So he just wanted everyone to know that this is a very important topic for our veterans, and to reiterate, it's for our nearly 84,000 members here in the state of Indiana. Also an important topic for the American Legion Auxiliary, who represents nearly 45,000 here in the state of Indiana, and our Sons of the American Legion, who represent nearly 38,000 members. So collectively, the Indiana American Legion family represents approximately 167,000 Hoosiers in the state of Indiana. At this time, I'd like to briefly highlight the National American Legion Organization's finding in the Commission's study recently about medical cannabis and the opinion of those who may be able to benefit from that drug. The information shown was overwhelming for the support for medical cannabis. Those veterans and their caretakers who were surveyed indicated that medical cannabis, those people indicated that medical cannabis, they wanted that for themselves. 92% of those surveyed said that they support medical cannabis research. 92% said that they support medical cannabis research. 83% of those surveyed said that they outright support medical cannabis access federally. 83% of those veterans and their caretakers surveyed. Also today, we are reaffirming our commitment to medical cannabis research here in the state level as outlined in our resolution. Our members are advocating for medical cannabis research. That support includes more growth and study of cannabis being permitted, the reclassification of cannabis at a level that at a minimum recognizes it as a drug with potential medical value. We also want to directly urge individuals and organizations that support our stance to get involved and take action immediately. Join in this fight if you believe this is something that can help veterans. Call, write, email your legislators about your stance on this issue. Many veterans are stricken with cancer and chronic pain, PTSD, TBI, Agent Orange exposure-related diseases and illnesses, where this medication in other states have shown to be effective for these conditions. Please visit our website, indianalegion.org/medical-cannabis, to take action right now. There is also more information and links on that study. There's other links and info about medical cannabis overall in our stance. Today, along with the Indiana American Legion family, we have individuals and organizations who are standing with the American Legion, Department of Indiana. They agree with our stance on this. They share similar views expressed by the individuals and representatives from these organizations. Our views are outlined on the subject of medical cannabis, and they are clearly defined by our organizational resolutions, which you will find in the media packets if you haven't grabbed one yet over there. Today, we'd like to start off by introducing a brave individual. She and her family have experienced an extremely traumatic week. As many may know, there was a crisis in Spencer, and her son, Mason Johnson, was there. And she would like to share her story. So please welcome Jade Griffin. Jade.
Thank you. Hello, my name is Jade Griffin. I am the proud military mother of Mason Johnson. As many of you heard, my son Mason was shot and killed last Saturday. My heart is broken. No child should have to die like that. His life was ended by his own demise from his mental breakdown from PTSD. My son Mason went to Iraq as a young man, 19 years old, excited to serve his country. But his experience was a horrific one. His friend died, his sergeant was greatly injured. The ugliness of war every day, he wondered if it was going to be his last. When he came home, I was so grateful. I praised God and thanked him for giving my son strength and bringing him home. I slowly noticed Mason doing odd things, looking under cars, pacing the floor, acting out anger, refusing to go to places he loved. I was so confused. Mason went to the VA and was diagnosed with PTSD. I never heard of this PTSD. What was it? I researched it and realized it explained his behavior. The VA gave him medication. I thought he would be okay, but he was not. His life was like a roller coaster. He was making bad choices, and he went back and they even increased his medication. The VA was trying to help with the resources they had available. It was not working. He started self-medicating himself. His life was on a downhill spiral, taking along all of us who loved him. I did not know what to do. Last year, Mason asked me to take him to Colorado, and I asked him why, and he said to buy cannabis. And I said, no way, I'm not going to spoil your recreational habit. I told him, just buy it here. He explained it was not the same. His friend went to Colorado and brought some back. He said it was a science. I thought to myself, you're not fooling me, I'm not doing it. But eventually, I finally gave in. We drove 15 hours to get to Colorado to purchase this cannabis. I was so scared and at wit's end. I felt like every moral fiber in my body was telling me it was wrong. I didn't want my kids doing drugs, but we went and purchased the cannabis. We went back to the hotel. After having the cannabis, I noticed his worried face softened. His eyes looked up from the ground, and he started looking around. He sat up in his chair, and he leaned back, and he put his feet out in front of him as if he was relaxed. I was so surprised. I saw a glimmer of my Mason coming back. He came inside and asked what I wanted to do, and I suggested the museum. He said, okay. This was a man who never wanted to be around crowds since he came home from Iraq, and he was taking me to the museum. We even went to dinner at the aquarium. That was a good day. My son lived life that day, and instead of existing in life. A few friends I told of my journey to Colorado. I was so scared of telling anyone, fear of others' opinions. But today, I have no fear. I have no Mason, only memories and a mission. I stand here today supporting the American Legion. My fear is gone, replaced with regret. But with regret, I will replace it with determination. My son fought his life for our freedom. He loved his country, and as all of our vets do. We need to stand up for our vets. Give our vets another choice, medical cannabis.
Thank you for sharing that, Jade. And our hearts and prayers go out to you and your family during this time. It's very, very brave of you to confront this head on and in this way. I thank you for that.
I know it made a difference because I've seen it with my own eyes.
I also want to point out an individual who was crucial in our testimony for our department executive committee to get this passed. He's a man who shared his personal story about his battle with cancer and how cannabis saved him from starvation after those treatments. Paul Smith, past Department Vice Commander, 10th District Judge Advocate. Would you like to give a brief statement on your experience?
Thank you. I'm Paul Smith, member of the American Legion for 30 years. 2016, I was diagnosed with cancer. After the chemotherapy, and it got to the point where I couldn't keep water down. I was so nauseous. What was coming up was burning my bottom lip. I went back to the VA. They hydrated me. I talked to my doctors there about it. They suggested that I try some marijuana to get rid of the nausea. They had given me pills that weren't working. I went back to my local post and knew a couple of guys that smoked. Got a couple of joints from them, went home, took a couple puffs off the joint, and the nausea was gone. My appetite returned, and I could finally eat and keep something down. This should be passed, no matter what the cost, no matter till Big Pharma gets their hands on it. I don't think it will be. I think it's all a money matter, and it should be taken care of for the veterans. It's not a thing about money. It's about taking care of the veterans that take care of this country. I was at my primary care physician this morning in the VA, asked him his opinion. He said it should be studied so we could do things for our veterans. It's just, in the opioid crisis that veterans are affiliated with now, this could also help them. Thank you.
Thank you, Paul. And I wanted Paul to come up here to kind of show the extreme spectrum of incidents and areas where this could have a positive effect if the research is shown as the anecdotal evidence and the overall response of the community is true. We just need that for sure evidence to prove that point. But I wanted to show that as an example of the extreme differences in areas where this can help our veterans out. There's so many areas where this could be such a positive effect on these folks. The next speaker I'd like to introduce is AMVET's Department of Indiana Legislative Director, an elected position within her organization. She's an active veteran advocate who recently was recognized with the 2017 Indiana Torchbearers Award, joining that elite group of influential and trailblazing women here in Indiana. Please welcome Lisa Wilkin.
Thank you, Al. My name is Lisa Wilkin. I'm the Legislative Director for AMVETS for the Department of Indiana. AMVETS is proud to stand shoulder to shoulder with the American Legion Department of Indiana on this very important topic for our veterans. Researching the use of medicinal cannabis is important. Implementing the use of medicinal cannabis in the state of Indiana is important. We want to make sure that our doctors in Indiana who treat our veterans have every tool in the toolbox available to them. We have doctors that treat our veterans that tell them you would be better off using marijuana than the 4 medications that I'm prescribing to you and the stimulant that I'm getting ready to prescribe. We have veterans that take 4 and 5 medications a day. They take antidepressants, antipsychotic medication, mood stabilizers, all to help with the result of their voluntary service. This can be looked at as a national security issue. If we want our young men and women to continue to volunteer for our all-voluntary forces, they need to know that we're going to stand behind them when they come home with service-connected disabilities, and that we're going to stand behind and fight for them with the VA, with the federal government, with our state government, to make sure that they have the ability and the opportunity to get the quality of life back that they had prior to taking that oath to defend this country about foreign and domestic issues. That's something that we need to make sure we realize here in Indiana. We have the 4th largest National Guard in Indiana. We are using our Guard and Reserve units like active duty units. They are doing multiple deployments. That's why we have such an increase in the number of post-traumatic stress and traumatic brain injury veterans here in Indiana. We need to make sure that our veterans in Indiana have the opportunity to get their life back. And that's why we are in support. Indiana AMVETS has a resolution at the state level supporting the use of medicinal marijuana. We support physicians in the state to be able to counsel their patients with no repercussions. We support research for medicinal cannabis. We also support reclassifying the drug at the federal level so that we can do federal research. Our national AMVETS has a resolution in support of medicinal cannabis also. Our membership, along with the American Legion membership, plan to continue to educate our legislators across the state. We're not talking about letting veterans smoke pot. We are talking about letting veterans use a medication prescribed and monitored by their physicians. It's absolutely nothing different than the opioids and the other medications that the VA hands out on a regular basis. We should not be okay with veterans in their late 40s and 50s having liver damage from the pain medications and antipsychotic medications that they're taking. Medicinal cannabis could be an answer for that. And we're asking our legislators and our leadership here in the state to continue to educate themselves on this issue and engage their voting veterans. Thank you.
Thank you, Lisa. Now I'd like to introduce the man who submitted the Indiana Legion resolution to his post, post 16 in Kokomo, and watched it move through each stage of the process and tracked it from post to district to department and all the committees and commissions within the organization. Luckily for our organization, democracy was allowed to take place. And he founded an organization solely focused on cannabis access for our veterans. It's called Hoosier Veterans for Medical Cannabis. Please welcome Mr. Jeff Staker.
All right. I get to go for the jugular. So, as many this might be a little bit long, but I'll try to go as fast as I can. Probably trying to stress the key points. As many veterans have prepared him or herself to go off to war, there are only 3 questions that need to be answered before doing so. And here at this press briefing in supporting medical cannabis for our Hoosier veterans is no different. Those questions are, we need to know our enemy, why we fight, and the type of ground that we'll be fighting upon. First, to know your enemy. In February of this year, I went before the State Senate Health Committee, warning them that if they implemented all these anti-opiate bills being proposed by Senator Merritt, with the governor's blessing, without giving due consideration of a beneficial alternative like medical cannabis, they should expect an increase in the overdose death rate. I tried to bring it to their attention that the VA and our government had attempted this approach only a couple years prior. And with that campaign strategy, our veterans have been and are literally the canary in the coal mine for what Indiana is doing at this time and has done ever since. Did Governor Holken and the Indiana General Assembly listen to our heeds, our pleads? Not one bit, and to this day they still refuse to hear or take one step in our direction. So where are we at almost a year later? Our state's overdose rate is even worse and above the level it was this time last year. Whereas the sanctuary states that have passed medical cannabis laws, 29 of them in the District of Columbia, you'll find that the reduction of that rate is somewhere between 25 to 50%. So when you take the opiates away from a patient, not only are they feeding their addiction by turning to street drugs like heroin, but they still need to be treated for their ailments, their long-term ailments. And for your veterans, PTSD, TBI, and chronic pain are amongst others, are commonplace. So the governor wants to issue Narcan and provide a rehab as part of his 5-point pillar to make Indiana great again. But without a beneficial alternative like cannabis, Narcan only revives the user to continue to feed off the same rubbish they've been feeding upon again and again. And as far as rehabilitation is concerned, the numbers show that 70% going into rehab will relapse after 30 days, and 90% will relapse after 1 year. So, Mr. Holcomb, why don't you just load your fellow Hoosier veterans onto cattle cars and ship them off to Auschwitz? The destination for where you're taking them here in our state is producing nothing more than the same deadly results. And while you're at it, if the collaborators at IU won't look at cannabis as a biomedical option, why don't you just write IU Health in big bold letters on the side of those cattle cars? We all are aware former President Harry S. Truman had a sign on his desk saying, "The buck stops here." Well, here in Indiana, that buck stops with Governor Holcomb. But before that buck gets before his eyes, it passes through the 150 state legislators within the General Assembly. There is a smoking gun for all the continuing death and carnage here in Indiana from the opiate epidemic, especially after being so forewarned. And that gun lies directly within your hands, Governor. So why do we fight? History seems always to repeat itself. Before our independence from Great Britain, the colonists were under the supreme rule and governed by King George III. Only after a reformation of our forefathers within the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution, they proclaimed that we the people have the right to govern ourselves in the conquest to form a more perfect union. Among those rights are life, liberty, and a pursuit of happiness, as Governor Christie so reminded us last week in his speech here in Indianapolis. In retrospect, how is Indiana governed? By King Holcomb and his parliament? Can you see the similarities? If over 73% of our Hoosier citizens and 86% of our Hoosier veterans are supportive of medical cannabis in one form or another, are we not the government of the people, by the people, for the people? So where is that representation within the walls of our State House? It's not there. If we the people, my fellow Hoosiers, were allowed to have this issue voted upon within our ballot system, like the 29 plus states I just mentioned, then and only then would this God-given medicine be available to our citizens. But today, here in Indiana, we are no different than those poor colonist souls living in prior to 1776. And in Indiana, this makes Indiana state government completely in violation of the Bill of Rights our founding fathers granted us within the Constitution. Do we have the right to petition against the state government for redress of grievances? Of course we do. 2 months ago, September 13th, I put together a forum at the Rayburn House Federal Building in Washington, D.C., entitled What Medical Cannabis Would Look Like for Our Veterans. Together with the country's and Canada's leading medical professions and veterans activist groups, we showed and proved without a shadow of a doubt that cannabis is a beneficial medicine. The rhetorical question I see right now in our state and federal legislators is research. We need more research. Well, I'm telling you here and now that that research is done and it is conclusive. Earlier this year, with the publication of the 2017 National Academy of Science and Engineering medical report, the health effects of cannabis and cannabidials, and the current state of evidence and recommendation for research, of which Dr. Abrams and Dr. Cooper, co-researchers and collaborators to this report, were part of my forum. In general, this report consisted of 16 experts, 2 of which I just mentioned, from the areas of marijuana, addiction, oncology, cardiology, neurology, respiratory disease, pediatric, adolescent health, and many more. They reviewed over 24,000 case studies abstracts, marijuana case study abstracts, of which the experts considered 10,700 relevant to their report. And upon their review, at nearly They arrived at nearly 100 different ailment conclusions, including PTSD and chronic pain, and found the research to be supportive of one of the following 5 final analysis. One, it was either conclusive evidence, substantial evidence, moderate evidence, limited evidence, or no or insufficient evidence to support association. Again, the research has been done and is available. If only our legislators would take their head out of the sand and look. And now it is time for our state and our federal legislators to implement this option for our veterans, as well for our citizens. And in my opinion, by personally sitting down face to face with the acting Undersecretary of Health and the senior White House advisor for the VA really would like to start an implementation and research program. But they and I get the impression that the VA's hands are tied due to cannabis improper scheduling. This could be one of the longest running lies in US history, and it is 100% completely wrong. Remember, know your enemy and why we fight. Third and finally, we need to know the type of ground that we are fighting upon as veterans. The ancient Chinese general Sun Tzu in his chronicles, The Art of War, described the 9 different types of terrain in which to fight upon and referenced one of those as death ground. Now, death ground is a terrain in which you put an army in a position where he must fight and be victorious. Surrender is not, or die trying. Surrender is not an option. So here we are today. We are educating and informing you of the enemy and why we fight. But we cannot stay idle and do nothing. Like on the shores of Normandy nearly 3/4 of a century ago, we must move forward and get off the beaches or men will die. If this life-saving, God-given medicine is not provided for your citizens and veterans, more of us, or shall I say more of your Hoosiers, fellow Hoosiers, will die, Governor Holcomb. So let's get on the battlefield here in Indiana and fight. Let's fight for a safer way to heal. In closing, and since I have been getting bombarded with emails and calls and asking me to respond to the Indiana Prosecuting Attorney Council, or IPAC's letter, so entitled, Marijuana is Not a Medicine. Let me say here and now, there is one reason and one reason only why they put out such a letter, and that is fear. Our fellow Hoosiers are speaking out loud and clear against this false propaganda, even ever since it was published just a few days ago, and the polls are showing it. It is well over 85% and climbing just against that letter alone. Their tactics of putting out the stats and quotes is bias and one-sided reporting, and it is their attempt to draw the public's attention to their point of view. They just don't want cannabis in any form in Indiana, even for medical purposes. It is not going to work. It didn't work for Joseph Goebbels and the Nazi Party, or Attorney General Curtis Hill in his article in the Indy Star last summer, nor Governor Chris Christie's speech in Indianapolis last week. We are tired of the lies because we know better. Knowledge is power, and we are not ignorant. IPAC is afraid because the majority of informed Hoosiers are speaking out to the contrary. IPAC should be afraid by making such a bold statement that marijuana is not a medicine. And this, my friends, will be the heart of their communications and fears going forth. I wish I could personally take on IPAC, the attorney generals, and both governors, and a jury, in front of a jury of our peers, and have them prove one thing and one thing only, that cannabis has no, I repeat, no medical benefits whatsoever. This, folks, is why they are so afraid, because they know they can't. So what are they doing? They are setting up an ambush, attempting to kill any chance or hope that this issue or any bill will be brought up before a committee hearing in the 2018 General Assembly session. IPAC is afraid because if we do get that opportunity to go before them, we will bring overwhelming evidence of support for our case, backed by patients, medical professionals, academia, and yes, even veterans who have paid the price to have their voices heard. It didn't work for them last year when they were defeated by the CBD bill for children with epilepsy, and they know that they can't win now, and they never will in the future when brought before the people. As a former Marine infantryman, when in an ambush, Your only option is to turn directly into that ambush and attack. It is a kill or be killed situation. And one more thing IPAC failed to mention in their letter. Cannabis never killed anyone, and it never will. And with that, I thank you for your time, your patience.
Thank you, Jeff. I'd like to introduce retired Air Force Captain Trauma Nurse with a wealth of knowledge when it comes to cannabis and veterans being treated with cannabis. He stays current regarding all the most recent information regarding cannabis, and he's an outspoken advocate standing up for this with the Indiana Normal organization. Please welcome Jason Straw.
Thank you. I'm Captain Jason Lee Straw, retired. I deployed to Afghanistan as a critical care air transport nurse and also a charge nurse at Bagram. While I was there, we had very severe traumas, and part of the reason that I'm here is because of the veterans that I've taken care of, and you can see that the opioid crisis is a result of the traumas that have happened through the over a decade of war. When IPAC wrote their letter, I started looking into some of the stuff that they were saying. And, you know, when you start looking at research, you have to look at both sides and come from somewhere in the middle and evaluate it. IPAC tends to lean all the way over to the side of, no, it's not medicine. Indiana Normal tends to look more towards the side, yes, let's support everything. I try to stay more neutral, which is why I like the FDA. FDA has a man-made THC version, which IPAC doesn't like to talk about. It's called Marinol. It's a Schedule III drug. Schedule I is it's not approved. Schedule II is tightly controlled. So here, you know, you'll hear a lot of state politicians say, oh, we don't want medical marijuana because it has THC in it. Well, we already have Marinol, which has been used since the 1970s. And that issue of saying, oh, we don't want THC, well, it's already been singled out and made by the pharmaceutical companies. So one of the other issues with the FDA is when you look at a whole plant that has more than 2 substances in it, it falls into the herbal or herb qualifications. And the FDA will never qualify that as a medication. They qualify those as herbs. So you'll never see the FDA regulating those. So this whole idea that the government's going to have the FDA say, oh yes, we looked at the research and we've singled it out and we have all these studies that this plant is a medication. No, you look at one substance like THC and say, yes, we've studied this, here's the studies, and it is now approved, just like they did with Marinol. And on that note, I'd like to introduce my friend and the communications director, David Phipps for Indiana.
Thank you, Jason. Well, I'm here representing Indiana Normal, and I'm here to speak to the people. I'm here to speak to my fellow Hoosiers. I'm here to ask you to stand with us, stand with Indiana Normal as we stand with our heroes, the people we owe everything to, the people we owe our freedom to. Let's use this freedom. Let's use this freedom to fight for those who fought for us. It's time we get them the medication they need, and it's time to save these lives. Using negative, false propaganda not backed by science is not helping these veterans. This is not a law enforcement issue. This is a moral issue. This is a health issue. This is a legislative issue. It's not a law enforcement issue. So that being said, we are asking our Attorney General and the Prosecutors Association for Indiana to please back off medical cannabis. Leave this to the legislators and the healthcare professionals to get this done for the people who need it. We are losing more people to this opioid epidemic than we are homicides and firearms combined. Yet we ignore the safe alternative that could help prevent this and help us take advantage of that 25% reduction on average that these other medical cannabis states are seeing. on opioid overdoses. We need to be taking advantage of that. We need to be saving lives. We need to stop using strategies that take care of after the fact. You know, if someone overdoses, give them this. Someone has this problem, give them this. You're not trying to prevent the problem. You're just trying to help them after they're already hurt. Let's give them this safe alternative to treat their pain. Let's give them this safe alternative to treat their PTSD and mental problems. Let's give them this safer medication. Science proves it. And if you don't believe me, I encourage you all to look up Professor Thomas Clark from IU South Bend. This man is the chairman of the biology department for IU South Bend. He teaches doctors for IU. He's very knowledgeable on this topic. He has a study published by IU. This study shows the medicinal value of this plant. Yet our Prosecutors Association wants to say there's no medical value. So I tell you, Hoosiers, you have a choice here. You can believe our prosecutors and our Attorney General on this healthcare advice, or you can listen to these healthcare professionals like Dr. Thomas Clark and Professor Chad Bartoloni, a paramedic science professor from Ivy Tech South Bend. He's also a working paramedic. He's on the front lines of our opioid epidemic. He sees firsthand how many people we're losing to this epidemic. His stance is this not only has medicinal value, but this is going to help us this is going to reduce dramatically the opioid overdoses like these other medical cannabis states are seeing. He sees it for what it is. This is a healthcare professional saying the exact opposite from what the prosecutors are saying. So who are you going to believe, Hoosiers? Are you going to believe the prosecutor with his healthcare advice, or are you going to believe the healthcare professionals? Personally, I'm going to go seek my health advice with the healthcare professionals. If I hurt my leg, I'm not going to make an appointment with the Attorney General's office. I'm not going to do that. They are not medical professionals. I'm going to see a doctor for that. And that's why they need to leave this alone and leave it to the medical professionals that actually know what they're doing. And we made it clear, overwhelming support for this issue in this state, no doubt about it. WTHR just ran a Facebook post yesterday. Last I looked, there were 5,000 plus people, yes, supporting it, and there were about 200 no's. If that doesn't reflect the overwhelming majority support in this issue, I don't know what does. The one thing that is keeping this from happening, it's not the governor, it's not the Attorney General, it's not the Prosecutors Association. It's the lack of people actually willing to get involved. We need Hoosiers to stand up and speak out for our veterans and for our citizens to get this medicine that they need so we can hurry up and save Hoosier lives. And until you get up and start speaking out, it's not going to happen. So that being said, that's all I have to say. I encourage everyone to get involved in this. And not only the people, press, your citizens too. I encourage the press to cover this issue as much as possible. Your coverage is going to help draw awareness to this issue. It's going to help educate Hoosiers on the truth behind it. I don't ask you to just support medical cannabis. I ask you to do as you've been doing lately and give the full picture, the full story. I really appreciate how you all have been doing that, and I encourage you to do that much more. That is going to help get the word out to our citizens and get this medicine to the Hoosiers that need it. And with that being said, I'm going to let William get back up here.
Thank you for that, David and Jason. Before we close up, I'd like to introduce State Representative Jim Lucas, who is planning on submitting a bill regarding medical cannabis here in the state of Indiana. So without further ado, Representative Lucas.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, I'll keep this short and sweet. We've heard a lot already this morning. My condolences to Jade and what she's recently gone through. I got into politics to do the right thing, and the right thing to me is decriminalizing medical marijuana and making it available to not just our veterans, who we've heard stories from today, but to Hoosiers. Of course, the research, we want to continue to research that, but we currently have 29 states that have adopted medical marijuana. The research is out there. We know it works. And to deny those benefits, to continue to not deny those benefits to our veterans and Hoosiers, to me, is immoral. We heard the word immoral earlier, and that brought up to me probably one of my favorite quotes ever by Frederick Bastiat, who wrote about the law. For the law to be respected, it must be respectable. For when the law and morality contradict each other, the citizen has the cruel alternative of either losing his moral sense or losing his respect for the law. Now, as a lawmaker, I have a duty and obligation to do something about that. And that's something I fully intend to do. I will be bringing legislation to the General Assembly next session that will be centered around the patient. It will be centered around the doctor. It will be centered around the providers that know what they're doing on a national level from 29 other states that will be bringing their expertise in to help our veterans and Hoosiers. It's going to be a fight. I'm not naive. I know that we have a long road ahead of us. But the thing that we have on our side are truth, facts, reason, and logic. We have the facts, knowing that this is a viable alternative. And as Lisa said earlier, it's another tool in the toolbox. And we can't get caught up in the fact this isn't a wonder drug. It's not a miracle drug. It doesn't cure everything. But like every other drug out there, it has its benefits that far outweigh the bad things. So we have an obligation to make this available to the Hoosiers that could benefit from it. So with that, I appreciate William. I appreciate the support of the American Legion and the 100,000 plus members out there. And I'm looking forward to the challenge ahead of us in the days ahead and see what we can do. Thank you.
In closing, I'd like to thank everyone for their time today and want to recognize, we want to ensure the recognition of the selfless service of all of our military veterans during this weekend's festivities. So we hope that all will thank a veteran whom you may encounter this weekend for their service to this nation. We also want to remind everyone that this is the holiday season. This is when we need to be checking in and knocking on the doors of our brothers and sisters in arms and making sure they're okay. We got 22 veterans a day committing suicide throughout the United States. It's crucial to ensure that they're doing okay. You know, butt in, get involved in their business, and make sure they're okay. Please visit your local American Legion post over this weekend as well. Continue to visit our website, indianalegion.org. And again, get involved. indianalegion.org/medical-cannabis. Visit the website. There's 3 tabs on that website. If you're a veteran, if you're a family member of a veteran, or if you're just a supporter of veterans, to submit a letter to your legislator today on that website. So go to that website, check it out, get the information off there, and get involved. Thank you so much for your time today.
That was wonderful, very powerful, very
I appreciate your service.
I had that mission in Minnesota County.